The moment I heard the scream, I knew my plan had worked. HOA Karen was in for the filthiest shock of her life. I rushed to my front window, pretending to be oblivious to what had just happened. But deep inside, I was grinning like a madman. Outside, Karen stood in my front yard, drenched in something brown and foul-smelling, her expensive designer clothes completely ruined. She screeched so loud that birds scattered from the trees. "Oh my God! What is this?" she wailed, frantically wiping at the disgusting sludge dripping from her face. I calmly stepped out onto my porch, suppressing my laughter. "Oh no, Karen. You didn't use my hose again, did you?" Her furious eyes locked onto me. "What the hell did you do?" I tilted my head, playing innocent. "Oh, you mean the hose you've been sneaking over to use every morning even though I told you to stop?" Her face twisted in rage and horror, the realization dawning on her. The water she had stolen from my house wasn't water at all. It was raw sewage from the old waste tank I had secretly hooked to the hose. And I had every reason to do it. It all started when I noticed my water bill had doubled out of nowhere. At first, I thought maybe I had left the sprinklers on too long or had a leak somewhere. But after checking every faucet, every pipe, and even my irrigation system, everything was fine. Still, my bill kept climbing and my lawn had random wet patches even when I wasn't watering. That's when I saw her. Karen, my nosy, entitled HOA board member neighbor, was sneaking into my yard early in the morning, grabbing my hose and watering her plants with MY water. She had a huge property with a lush garden, but instead of paying for her own water, she was stealing mine. I confronted her one afternoon when I caught her red-handed. "Karen, what are you doing with my hose?" I asked, crossing my arms. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she gave me her signature Karen smirk and shrugged. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little water. You're not using it, so what's the big deal?" "The big deal," I gritted my teeth, "is that you didn't ask. And you're running up my bill." She scoffed. "Oh, please. As an HOA board member, I'm ensuring the community stays beautiful. You should be thanking me." Thanking her? I almost laughed in her face. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to be reasonable. "Well, from now on, don't use my water. Get your own." Karen rolled her eyes. "Fine," she said way too easily. I didn't believe her for a second. And I was right. The next morning, I checked my security cameras. There she was again, sneaking into my yard like a raccoon using my hose. She thought she was so clever, but she had no idea I was about to teach her the lesson of a lifetime. I needed a way to stop Karen for good, and a simple lock on the hose wouldn't work. She'd probably just find another way around it. So I came up with a plan so foul, so perfectly evil, that she'd never dare touch my hose again. I had an old and used sewage tank from an abandoned plumbing project in my backyard. It wasn't connected to anything, but it still had some leftover sludge in the bottom. Nasty, thick, and disgusting. I spent the next evening setting everything up. Disconnected my hose from the regular water supply. Rerouted it straight to the sewage tank. Waited for Karen to take the bait. And the next morning, she did. Karen strutted into my yard like she owned the place, grabbed my hose like always and turned it on full blast. Splat. A tsunami of putrid brown sludge exploded from the hose, drenching her from head to toe. She screamed so loud the entire neighborhood woke up. Now, standing in my yard, covered in sewage, she glared at me like a demon. You did this on purpose." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so you admit to stealing my water?" She opened her mouth, then shut it, realizing she had just incriminated herself. But she wasn't done. Karen's rage wasn't just about the sewage. It was about control. And she wasn't about to let this go. She clenched her fists, her eyes burning with hatred. "You'll regret this," she growled. "You just made an enemy of the HOA." I folded my arms, smirking. "Oh, I'm shaking, Karen." Little did I know, she wasn't bluffing. And this was just the beginning. After my disgusting prank, I thought Karen would finally leave me alone. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No more sneaking into my yard. No more stolen water. I figured the sewage bath had taught her a well-deserved lesson. I was wrong. One morning I stepped outside to grab my mail, and froze. A bright red violation notice was taped to my front door. Bold letters screamed across the top. "Immediate action required. HOA infraction notice." I ripped it off, scanning the ridiculous list of complaints. Unauthorized changes to the property. Improper storage of hazardous materials. Creating a health hazard in the community. At the bottom, in smug cursive handwriting, was Karen's signature. My blood boiled. She was using her power as an HOA board member to come after me. And the worst part? She had pictures of my little sewage setup. I didn't even know how she'd gotten them, but there they were. A note at the bottom of the letter made my stomach twist. Failure to comply will result in a $500 fine and further action. I gritted my teeth. Of course she couldn't let things go. Karen was going to make my life a living nightmare, and she had the entire HOA behind her. To be fair, this wasn't the first time Karen had pulled something like this. Since the day I moved in, she acted like the whole neighborhood was her kingdom, and the rest of us were her subjects. She'd scold you if your grass was too tall, inspect your trash bins for unsightly waste, and even measure how far your car tires stuck out of your driveway. I tried to keep my head down, but Karen had it out for me from the start. What? Because I didn't play by her rules. When she told me to cut down my garden gnome display, I added 5 more gnomes just to spite her. When she said my fence was too bright, I repainted it a brighter shade of red. And now, the hose prank had pushed her over the edge. I was public enemy number 1 in her eyes. And she wasn't going to stop until I was miserable or gone. That afternoon, as I tried to cool off, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Karen standing there, flanked by 2 other HOA board members who looked like they sucked the joy out of puppies for fun. Karen crossed her arms, her lips curling into a fake smile. "We need to talk," she said sweetly, too sweetly. I stepped onto the porch, forcing a smile of my own. What a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? She held up a clipboard. "We've decided that your little sewage stunt violates the HOA Health and Safety Code. And unless you remove the equipment immediately, you'll be fined $500. Plus, an additional $100 for every day you fail to comply." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're joking, right? You were stealing my water, Karen?" Her eyes flashed. "Prove it," she said, daring me. I clenched my fist. She knew exactly what she was doing. Without concrete proof, I couldn't fight back. And I had no idea if my security camera had caught her the morning of the sewage incident. "Fine," I snapped. "I'll remove it." "Good choice," she said, spinning on her heel. "Oh, and by the way, your grass is half an inch too tall. You might want to get that trimmed before our next inspection." I wanted to slam the door in her face. But I didn't. Not yet. Because in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the evening disassembling the sewage trap, grumbling under my breath. If Karen wanted a war, I was ready to give her one. But I needed to be smarter. Craftier. I pulled out my phone and checked the security footage from my yard. If I could catch her sneaking around just one more time, I'd have proof to take to the rest of the HOA. As the footage loaded, I felt a surge of hope, until I saw what Karen had done. She had disabled my camera. Somehow, that sneaky witch had cut the power to my outdoor system the night before her stunt. I clenched my jaw. She thought she had me cornered. But if she wanted to play dirty, I could play even dirtier. And this time I wouldn't get caught. I stayed up until midnight working on phase 2 of my revenge. This plan wasn't as messy as the sewage prank, but it was a whole lot smarter. I set up a new hidden camera disguised as a birdhouse, completely wireless with no external power supply Karen could tamper with. Then I rerouted my sprinkler system to a special reserve tank I kept in my garage. This wasn't sewage. No, that was too easy. This time I filled the tank with something even better. Liquid skunk spray. One twist of the valve and anyone who touched my hose, or my property, would get a stinky surprise they wouldn't forget. And Karen? She was too greedy to resist. I sat back with a smile, watching the hidden feed from my birdhouse camera. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. The next morning I was up early sipping my coffee on the porch. The air was crisp, the sun was shining, and I was waiting. I knew Karen's routine by heart now. She couldn't resist using my water. And today? She was walking straight into my trap. At exactly 7:14 a.m., her back door creaked open. There she was, wearing one of those ugly leopard print robes that screamed, "I'm the queen of the HO." She scanned the street, making sure no one was watching, then strutted across her lawn, and into mine. Bingo. I held my breath as she grabbed my hose, completely oblivious to the hidden skunk spray reserve tank I had connected the night before. Her bony fingers twisted the nozzle. And then it happened. Psst. A jet of foul-smelling skunk spray blasted out at full force, soaking her from head to toe. It wasn't just a little stink, it was industrial-grade skunk essence, the kind farmers use to keep predators away. And Karen? She got the full treatment. Aha! Her scream pierced the morning air like a fire alarm. She dropped the hose, gagging and flailing as the noxious smell clung to her skin and hair. I had to bite my tongue to stop from laughing out loud. It was perfect. Oh my God. What is this? She shrieked, stumbling backward. She gagged so hard I thought she might actually vomit on my lawn. I casually leaned on the porch railing. Morning, Karen. Something wrong? I called out sweetly. Her furious, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. You did this on purpose, she spat, her voice half a growl. I shrugged, barely holding back a smirk. I told you to stop using my water. Maybe you should have listened. Karen stomped back to her house, still reeking like a skunk, leaving a trail of stench behind her. I thought that would be the end of it. I mean, what rational person would push things after that? But Karen? She wasn't rational. She was vindictive. By lunchtime, I had another HOA notice taped to my door. This one was worse. Tampering with community property. Creating a noxious hazard. Harassment of an HOA board member. At the bottom, in that same smug cursive, Karen had left a note. Consider this your final warning. I clenched the paper in my fist. She wanted a war? She had one. The next week, Karen called a special HOA meeting, and you bet I showed up. The meeting room was filled with her loyal followers, most of whom looked like they got their thrills from measuring grass and filing noise complaints. Karen stood at the front, pretending to be calm and professional, but the faint smell of skunk spray still lingered around her. No amount of perfume could fully cover it. Thank you all for coming, she said, shooting a death glare in my direction. We're here to discuss a serious matter. A resident who has repeatedly violated HOA policies and created a hazardous living environment. All eyes turned toward me. Of course. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. You mean the resident whose water you keep stealing, Karen? A few neighbors snickered. Even some of her own board members shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't the only one who had a problem with her. I was just the only one brave enough to fight back. Karen's fake smile tightened. That's a baseless accusation, she said. This meeting isn't about me, it's about a dangerous prank that put our community at risk. I smiled. Dangerous prank? I thought you said you didn't touch my hose. Her face flushed red and for once she couldn't answer. I let the silence hang for a moment, then pulled out my secret weapon, a USB drive. Funny thing, I said, standing up. After my cameras mysteriously malfunctioned, I decided to install a new system, one you couldn't tamper with. Karen's face paled. I plugged the USB into the room's projector and boom, the footage played. Clear as day, there was Karen sneaking into my yard and grabbing the hose over and over again. And then, the skunk spray disaster in full 4K glory. The room erupted. Some people gasped. Others burst into laughter. Even her fellow board members exchanged wide-eyed looks. You violated my privacy, Karen snapped, but her voice was shaky. I grinned. No, I protected my property. And now everyone sees who the real problem is. A woman in the front row, Mrs. Donnelly, a sweet elderly neighbor Karen had bullied for years, spoke up. Enough is enough, she said, shaking her head. I'm tired of you using the HOA for your personal vendettas, Karen. Several people nodded. Another man chimed in. Shouldn't she be fined for trespassing? Karen's jaw dropped. This wasn't how she expected things to go. The tide was turning, and fast. The HOA president cleared his throat, looking fed up. We'll be conducting a formal review of Karen's conduct. In the meantime, any fines against you are suspended until further notice. I smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Game. Set. Match. As the meeting wrapped up, I caught Karen glaring at me from across the room. Her face was red, her hands were shaking, but that wasn't fear in her eyes. It was rage. I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. And something told me she had one last trick up her sleeve. And this time, she was willing to cross every line to win. I thought the HOA meeting would shut Karen down for good. After exposing her on the big screen, in front of her own board members, most people would have backed off. But Karen? She was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to a nightmare. My lawn, my beautifully manicured, perfectly green lawn, was ruined. Deep, ugly brown patches were scattered across the grass. It looked like someone had poured chemicals in random spots, burning the turf right down to the roots. And I didn't need to guess who did it. I stormed over to Karen's house. I didn't care if it was 7 a.m., this had gone too far. I pounded on her door and after a minute, it swung open. There she stood, wearing another ridiculous robe, this time hot pink as if she were some kind of suburban royalty. Her smug smile told me everything I needed to know. Problem with your lawn? She asked sweetly, pretending to stifle a yawn. I clenched my fist. Don't play dumb, Karen. You did this. She gasped, eyes wide with fake innocence. Me? Oh honey, I wouldn't dare touch your property. But maybe if you weren't so focused on pranks, you'd take better care of your yard. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to explode. She wanted me to lose my temper, because then she could run crying to the HOA again. Not today. You think you're smart, I said, stepping closer. But I know it was you. And when I prove it, you're finished. Her smile twitched, but she held her ground. Good luck with that, she said, slamming the door in my face. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I could play dirtier, but smarter. That afternoon, I went to the local garden center and picked up a few things. New grass seed, the kind that grows back faster and thicker. A motion-activated sprinkler system, with a hidden twist. I spent the next few hours repairing the lawn and installing the new system. On the surface, it looked like a regular sprinkler, but inside the tank? I mixed a little something special, organic fish emulsion fertilizer. If Karen snuck into my yard again, she'd get sprayed with a thick, rotting fish smell, and trust me, that stuff clings for days. But that wasn't my only trick. I also installed a second hidden camera, this one tucked inside a decorative rock by the garden bed. This time, Karen wouldn't be able to tamper with it. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. That night, just past midnight, my phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected. I grinned, opening the live feed. And there she was, Karen, creeping across my lawn like some kind of suburban ninja, a spray bottle clutched in her hand. I hit the activate button. Whoosh. A powerful jet of fish fertilizer sprayed straight at her face. Aha! Karen stumbled back, waving her arms in a panic as the foul-smelling liquid drenched her hair and robe. I had to clap a hand over my mouth to stop from laughing. She deserved every bit of it. Serves you right, I whispered. But then, something weird happened. Instead of running back home, Karen whipped out her phone and snapped pictures of my yard. I frowned. What was she up to now? The next morning I got my answer. A certified letter from the HOA was waiting in my mailbox. I ripped it open, skimming the first few lines. My stomach twisted in knots. Notice of formal hearing, possible eviction. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to get me kicked out. Apparently, Karen had submitted evidence that my yard violated the community beautification rules. Her photos showed bare patches of grass, thanks to her, and she claimed my sprinkler system was an unsanctioned modification. At the bottom was the kicker. If violations are not corrected within 7 days, the HOA reserves the right to pursue legal action, including fines and forced sale of the property. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't about grass or rules. Karen wanted me gone. But if she thought she could win, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going down without a fight. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything: the damaged lawn, the hidden camera footage of Karen's nighttime vandalism, and every ridiculous letter she'd sent. I also dug deeper into the HOA's bylaws, and what I found was a goldmine. Turns out, Karen's sprinkler sabotage and chemical damage violated the Environmental Protection Policy, a serious offense that could get her removed from the board. And guess who had proof? Me. I packaged up everything: footage, photos, legal research, and sent it to every HOA board member and the local news station. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was about to bury her. The day of the hearing, I walked into the HOA office with my evidence folder in hand. Karen sat across from me, her usual smug expression plastered on her face. But by the time I finished presenting my case, her smile was gone. The board members looked at each other, whispering and frowning. Even her most loyal allies couldn't ignore hard evidence. We'll be reviewing these allegations carefully, the HOA president said, eyeing Karen suspiciously. And in the meantime, all pending actions against you are suspended. Karen's face was livid, but there was nothing she could do. For the first time, I was winning. But I knew one thing for sure: Karen wasn't finished yet. For a few days after the HOA hearing, things were quiet. Too quiet. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something worse. And oh, did she ever. It started with the smell. I came home from work one evening and was immediately hit by a stench so foul I gagged. It wasn't just outside. It clung to the air, sinking into everything. I checked the trash cans. Empty. The drains. Clear. But when I walked around the side of the house, I found it. A giant mound of manure. Fresh. Wet. And sitting right on top of my sprinkler system. Karen had escalated, big time. I stormed back inside and pulled up my hidden camera feed. Sure enough, there she was, Karen, sneaking across my lawn at 3 a.m. She was wearing that same pink robe, dragging 2 heavy buckets from her garage. When she dumped the disgusting contents onto my sprinkler system, I nearly lost it. This wasn't just a petty prank anymore, she was destroying my property. But instead of confronting her, I took a deep breath. No angry door pounding this time. I had a better idea, one that would end this feud forever. I spent the next day preparing my final move. Step 1. Clean up the mess, but not before taking pictures from every angle. I documented everything: the manure, the damaged sprinkler system, and even the tracks leading back to Karen's yard. Step 2. I swapped out the fertilizer tank with something even better: raw sewage from a septic pump. Karen wanted to play dirty? Fine. But now, every drop of water that came through that hose would smell like rotten eggs and worse. Step 3. I sent the camera footage directly to the HOA board with a detailed formal complaint. But I wasn't done yet. The next day, I saw her snooping around my yard again. She thought she was slick, checking if I'd removed the sprinkler. I watched from my window as she peeked over my fence. And just like clockwork, she reached for my hose. The second she turned the faucet, a stream of foul brown sludge blasted out, all over her hands, her shoes, and that ridiculous pink robe. Her scream echoed through the entire neighborhood. What is this? I stepped outside, struggling to keep a straight face. Oh, Karen, I said sweetly. Is there a problem? You did this on purpose. She was gagging, trying to shake the sludge off her hands. I mean, if you didn't trespass and steal my water, you wouldn't have this issue, right? I tilted my head. Funny how that works. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering and laughing as Karen stomped back to her house, reeked of sewage. Later that afternoon, the HOA president called. His voice was icy. After reviewing the evidence, the board has decided to remove Karen as HOA vice president immediately. I pumped my fist in the air. Finally. And, he continued, because of her repeated harassment and property damage, we're issuing her a formal citation. One more violation and she'll face legal consequences. I couldn't stop the grin spreading across my face. After months of stress, I had won. But Karen? She was finished. The next day, a moving truck showed up at Karen's house. Rumor was, after losing her power on the HOA and becoming the laughingstock of the neighborhood, she couldn't handle the shame. As I watered my fresh, green lawn, using my own hose, thank you very much, I saw her standing on the curb, glaring at me. I gave her a cheerful wave. Need some water for the road, Karen? She huffed, turned on her heel, and disappeared forever. And my lawn? Never looked better. For a while, life in the neighborhood was perfect. With Karen gone, the air felt lighter. No more petty letters, no more middle-of-the-night sabotage, and best of all, my lawn was finally safe. I thought the HOA drama was behind me. I was wrong. Because just when I was starting to enjoy the peace, I noticed a new car parked in Karen's old driveway. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows. Whoever the new neighbor was, they weren't exactly rolling out the welcome wagon. I figured they were just settling in, until I saw the HOA badge hanging from the driver's mirror. My heart sank. Karen might have been gone, but the HOA had just sent in her replacement. And I had a bad feeling about this one. A few days later, I finally got my first look at the new neighbor. I was mowing my lawn when the SUV door swung open. Out stepped a tall, stiff-looking man in a perfectly pressed suit, on a Saturday morning. He wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and he walked like someone who owned the entire street. This guy screamed trouble. He marched straight across the road and stopped at my fence. Morning, I called, trying to play it cool. His mouth twitched, like smiling might physically hurt him. I'm Mr. Nichols. New HOA president, he said, holding out a hand like he expected me to salute. President? Oh great. Karen's replacement wasn't just on the board. He was in charge. I'm the guy who's going to clean up the mess left behind, he added, his eyes sweeping over my yard. I clenched the mower handle. Mess. He pulled out a clipboard, of course he had a clipboard, and flipped through it. I've reviewed the community records. Your name came up a lot. I forced a smile. Funny, I was just minding my own business. But maybe you missed the part where Karen was the one breaking the rules. I don't care about the past, he said coldly. I care about order. And I expect everyone to follow the rules, you included. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my gut. I didn't have to wait long for Mr. Nichols to show his true colors. The next week, I found a letter stuffed in my mailbox. Violation notice, unauthorized lawn decor. I frowned. Lawn decor? The only thing I had was my garden gnome, a harmless little guy wearing sunglasses and flipping a peace sign. Karen hated him. I sighed and checked the HOA guidelines. Nowhere did it say gnomes were banned. This wasn't about the rules, this was about control. I decided to play nice, for now. I moved the gnome to my backyard. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The very next day another letter arrived. Violation notice, improper garbage bin placement. I stared at the paper in disbelief. My bins were exactly where they'd been for years, tucked neatly against the side of my garage. I glanced across the street. Other neighbors' bins were in plain sight, but they weren't getting notices. This was personal. I wasn't about to let HOA 2.0 push me around. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I started keeping records. Every letter he sent? Photographed and filed. Every conversation? Documented. And just in case he tried to pull a Karen, I upgraded my cameras, this time covering every angle of my property. The next time Mr. Nichols came sniffing around, I'd be ready. But I had no idea how far he was willing to go. A week later, I woke up to the sound of a truck outside. Peeking through my blinds, I saw two workers unloading something massive onto my driveway. My stomach twisted when I got a closer look. It was a storage pod, and it wasn't mine. I threw on my shoes and marched outside. Hey, what are you doing? I called to the workers. Delivery for Mr. Nichols, one of them said, shrugging. I turned to find him standing on his porch, a smug smile on his face. You can't leave this on my property. I snapped. Actually, he said smoothly, waving his clipboard, I've received multiple complaints about your garage being unsightly. This temporary storage pod is a community improvement measure. He was framing me, making it look like my garage was a problem so he could punish me. But two could play that game. I took pictures of the pod on my driveway, then pulled up the HOA rules. And wouldn't you know it? Section 14, Article 3. Temporary structures are prohibited on private property without written consent from the homeowner. Gotcha. I spent the next 2 hours drafting a formal complaint, complete with timestamps, photos, and a copy of the exact bylaw he was breaking. I didn't just send it to Mr. Nichols. I sent it to the entire HOA board, the city zoning office, and, just for fun, our local news station. By the next morning, his storage pod was gone. But I wasn't stopping there. If Mr. Nichols wanted a war, he was about to get one. When the HOA inspection team showed up, I was waiting on my porch with a smile. Mr. Nichols stood at the front, clipboard in hand, looking way too smug. Behind him were two other board members. One looked bored, the other looked uncomfortable. Morning, I said cheerfully. Lovely day for an inspection, huh? Nichols ignored my greeting and started scribbling notes. We'll be thorough, he said like it was a threat. And thorough they were. For 2 hours they combed through my yard. Nichols measured my grass with a ruler, inspected my flower beds, and even checked if my fence was properly aligned. If I thought Mr. Nichols was going to back down after I got his storage pod removed, I was dead wrong. Instead of retreating, he doubled down, and his next move was the dirtiest one yet. It started with a letter. A big, fancy envelope stamped with the HOA's official seal. But when I opened it, my stomach twisted into knots. Mandatory property inspection notice. Apparently, Mr. Nichols had filed a request for a compliance inspection. And guess whose house was at the top of the list? Mine. And the kicker? The inspection was scheduled for 1 week from today. If they found even one violation, I'd be hit with massive fines, or worse, forced to remedy my property to fit their ridiculous standards. I knew exactly what this was. Payback. But if Nichols thought he could break me with paperwork, he was about to learn just how petty I could get. I had 7 days to prepare. So I got to work. Step 1. Document everything. I walked every inch of my property, taking photos of every lawn decoration, every gutter, even the paint on my mailbox. If Nichols tried to claim I was out of compliance, I'd have proof to the contrary. Step 2. Beat him at his own game. I combed through the HOA bylaws with a fine-tooth comb. For every obscure rule he might use against me, I found loopholes that protected my property. For instance, while lawn ornaments over 18 inches were banned, there was no rule against seasonal displays. So, I put my garden gnome in a Santa hat. Totally legal. Step 3. The trap. I installed one more hidden camera, right above my garden hose. If Nichols wanted to pull a Karen and mess with my property, I'd catch him red-handed. By the time inspection day rolled around, I was ready. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a single violation. I was starting to think I'd won, until he walked toward my hose. Nichols bent down, inspecting the spigot like he expected to find gold. "What's this?" he said suddenly, pretending to spot something suspicious. He reached out and twisted the hose nozzle, hard. And just like I planned, a stream of raw sewage blasted out, right into his face. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a laugh. His clipboard dropped. His fancy suit? Ruined. What is this? Nichols staggered backward, dripping with the foulest-smelling sludge imaginable. Oh no, I said innocently. Looks like someone must have tampered with my water supply. What a shame. The other board members? Horrified. Nichols? Livid. But the best part? My camera caught everything, in 4K. The inspection ended immediately after that. I cleaned up, sent a copy of the footage to the full HOA board, and demanded a formal investigation into Nichols for trespassing and harassment. The next day, I got an email from the HOA's legal team. Mr. Nichols has been temporarily suspended pending further review. I nearly cheered. But I wasn't done yet. Using every shred of evidence I'd gathered, his fake violations, the storage pod stunt, and now the hose incident, I filed a formal complaint with the city. And just like that, Nichols wasn't just in hot water with the HOA. He was facing real legal trouble. A week later, I spotted a moving truck outside Nichols's house. Rumor was, after the embarrassment and the pending lawsuit, he had no choice but to resign from the HOA and leave the neighborhood entirely. As his SUV pulled out of the driveway, I stood on my lawn watering my grass. With my own hose, thank you very much. I gave him a little wave as he drove past. He didn't wave back. But hey, my lawn never looked better. With Mr. Nichols gone, I finally thought I'd get some peace and quiet. The neighborhood felt lighter without his clipboard patrols and constant letters. My garden gnome, still rocking his Santa hat, stood proudly in the front yard. For the first time in months, I could actually enjoy my morning coffee without checking for violation notices. But just as I started to relax, a new storm was brewing. It began with a letter, one unlike any I'd ever received. This one was written on fancy letterhead, with gold embossing and a seal that read, HOA Special Enforcement Committee. And the opening line? Effective immediately, your property is under heightened surveillance. My blood ran cold. It seemed the HOA wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. Later that afternoon, I spotted a new face walking the block. A woman, mid-50s, with severe blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it might snap. She wore a stiff navy blazer and carried a tablet like it was a sword of justice. She didn't just glance at the houses, she inspected them, taking photos and tapping notes. When she reached my driveway, I felt her eyes linger. I stepped outside and forced a smile. New to the neighborhood? Her lips curved into a razor-thin smirk. I'm Ms. Hargrove, head of the Special Enforcement Committee. Her voice was the kind you'd expect from someone who enjoyed writing parking tickets. Special enforcement? What was this, the HOA police? We're here to clean up the problem properties, she added, eyes locked on mine. Of course. I was the problem. I follow the rules, I said calmly. Her smirk widened. We'll see about that. And with that she strutted off, like she already owned my soul. I thought Nichols was bad, but Hargrove? She made him look like a puppy. By the next day, she'd installed cameras at both neighborhood entrances, to maintain safety, according to the HOA bulletin. But I knew better. These cameras weren't just watching everyone, they were watching me. I even caught a guy in a HOA vest peeking over my fence one morning, pretending to check the sprinkler lines. This wasn't enforcement, it was harassment. So, I did what anyone would do when faced with a power-hungry HOA tyrant. I got sneaky. I spent the next week tracking everything Ms. Hargrove and her team did. Every inspection. Every camera adjustment. Every time they accidentally kicked over my recycling bin or tried to measure my fence. And then I found my opening. Buried deep in the HOA bylaws, Section 22, subsection C, was a little gem. Any new surveillance measures must be voted on by the entire community within 30 days of installation. Guess what? No one voted on Ms. Hargrove's little spy network. And I was about to use that against her. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and I made sure to arrive early. When Ms. Hargrove strutted in, flanked by her enforcement goons, I stood up and cleared my throat. I have a motion to present, I announced. Her eyes narrowed. Proceed. I held up a folder, full of documents, photos, and most importantly, the bylaws. These surveillance cameras violate Section 22, subsection C, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. And unless you want to be sued, I suggest you hold a community vote, tonight. Murmurs swept through the room. People hated those cameras and Ms. Hargrove knew it. Her jaw clenched, but she nodded stiffly. Fine. We'll vote. The ballot box passed around the room, and when the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. 75% of the community voted to remove the cameras. Checkmate. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt Hargrove's icy glare burning into my back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because just as I was about to leave, I caught a glimpse of something new on her tablet. A file labeled, Property Acquisition Initiative. What was that? I had no idea, but something told me Ms. Hargrove's games were about to get a whole lot worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ms. Hargrove was planning something bigger. Something far worse than cameras and fake violations. And that mysterious file on her tablet? Property Acquisition Initiative? Yeah, that haunted me. I needed to know what it meant. Because if Ms. Hargrove was coming for my house, she was going to learn just how far I was willing to go to protect it. I started digging. Late at night, while the rest of the neighborhood slept, I scoured every HOA meeting note, budget report, and legal document I could get my hands on. And that's when I found it. Page 87 of the HOA financial report. Buried under a bunch of legal jargon was this gem. Properties with ongoing violations exceeding 90 days may be subject to HOA acquisition for community betterment. In other words, if they harassed a homeowner long enough, and the fines piled up, the HOA could legally seize their property. And Ms. Hargrove? She wasn't just trying to enforce the rules. She was trying to take my home. I needed proof. If she was targeting me, there had to be others. So, I started talking to my neighbors. Most people were too scared to speak up, but not Mrs. Caldwell. She'd lived here for 30 years and wasn't afraid of anyone, especially not the HOA. When I asked her about Ms. Hargrove, her face hardened. She's already forced 2 families out, Mrs. Caldwell said, lowering her voice. Both had small violations, trash cans left out, paint slightly off color. But after months of fines, they couldn't pay. Had to sell their homes, to the HOA. I felt my stomach twist. How did they get away with it? I asked. Mrs. Caldwell's lips curled into a bitter smile. Simple. No one fights back, until it's too late. Well, I wasn't about to let that happen. If Ms. Hargrove wanted a war, I'd give her one. Step 1. Remove any excuse she had to find me. I spent an entire weekend making sure my property was flawless. Fresh paint. Perfect lawn. Trash cans tucked away like they were in a military bunker. Step 2. Expose her scheme. I drafted a letter, detailing everything I'd found about the Property Acquisition Initiative, the illegal surveillance, and the homeowners she'd forced out. And I sent it to every single person in the neighborhood. Within 24 hours, the entire community was buzzing. People were angry, and for the first time, that anger wasn't pointed at me. But Miss Hargrove? She didn't take it lying down. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from the HOA. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure on property. I stared at it in disbelief. They were claiming my garden gnome, the one wearing a Santa hat, was an illegal structure. Are you kidding me? But the real kicker? They were slapping me with a $1,500 fine and demanding its immediate removal. I clenched my fist. If she thought a fine would break me, she was wrong. I wasn't backing down, not now. If Hargrove wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. I left the gnome right where it was, but I made one small tweak. I rigged my garden hose, again. But this time, instead of sewage, I filled it with a mix of sticky syrup and food dye. And I installed another hidden camera, aimed directly at the gnome. If Hargrove or her goons came onto my property again, I'd catch them in 4K, and give them the stickiest, most embarrassing surprise of their lives. It didn't take long. 2 nights later, I caught movement on my security feed. A figure crept onto my lawn wearing a HOA vest, and holding a clipboard. Bingo. I hit record and watched as they leaned down to inspect the gnome. Right on cue, they twisted the hose. And, splat. A flood of thick, bright red syrup blasted out, covering their blazer, their hair, everything. The figure stumbled back, spluttering and cursing. And when they turned to run, I got a clear shot of their face. It wasn't some random HOA worker. It was Ms. Hargrove herself. I uploaded the footage to every community forum and email thread in the neighborhood. By morning, everyone had seen Ms. Hargrove's sticky disaster. But I didn't stop there. I also sent a copy to the local news and filed a harassment claim with the city. And within 48 hours, I got the best letter of all. Effective immediately, Ms. Hargrove has been removed from her position as HOA chairperson. I stood on my porch that afternoon, sipping my coffee, watching as a moving truck pulled up to her house. She was gone, for good. And my garden gnome? He stayed right where he belonged, smiling. With Ms. Hargrove out of the picture, the neighborhood felt like it could finally breathe again. No more surprise inspections. No more ridiculous fines. And best of all, my garden gnome, still wearing his Santa hat, stood proudly in my front yard like a trophy. For the first time in months I thought the nightmare was over. But if I'd learned anything from dealing with the HOA, it was this: evil doesn't go quietly. And I was right. For the next few weeks things were almost too quiet. No violation notices. No HOA emails. Not even a peep about community standards. It felt like I had one. But in the back of my mind, a voice nagged me. Why was it so easy? One evening as I was watering my garden with a regular hose, no pranks this time, I noticed something odd. The HOA office, normally bustling with Karen types on power trips, was completely empty. The lights were off. The door? Locked. A chill crept down my spine. What were they planning? The next morning I found an envelope on my porch. No stamp. No name. Just one word printed on the front. Urgent. I ripped it open and my heart nearly stopped. Notice of eminent domain, property acquisition approved. The HOA was still trying to take my house. And this time they weren't even hiding it. According to the letter, my ongoing violations had reached a critical level, and the HOA had legally claimed my property under some obscure community revitalization clause. They were planning to auction off my home in 30 days. I clenched my fist. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one. I stormed to the county records office, determined to find out who was pulling the strings. If Miss Hargrove was out, someone else had to be behind this. After hours of searching, I found a paper trail. And the name on every single document? Mr. Nichols. That's right. The original HOA tyrant, the one I thought I had defeated, was still pulling the strings from behind the scenes. He had stepped down as president, but he was now working as a consultant for a real estate development company. And guess who wanted to buy up cheap neighborhood homes and turn them into luxury condos? I felt my blood boil. This wasn't about community standards. It was about money, and my home was just a prize in his greedy little game. If I wanted to stop Mr. Nichols, I had to hit him where it hurt. His wallet. So, I did some digging and found a loophole buried in the HOA charter. Any major property acquisition must be approved by a majority vote of the community. Bingo. If I could rally the neighbors, we could block the sale, and finally take the HOA down for good. I went door to door telling everyone the truth. How Mr. Nichols was still controlling the HOA. How he was trying to steal our homes. And how we had one last chance to stop him. By the time the emergency meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was packed, and people were angry. Mr. Nichols stood at the podium, fake smile plastered on his face. This initiative will improve our community, he droned. By removing problem properties, we'll? You mean stealing our homes? I shouted, cutting him off. The crowd erupted. People I'd never seen speak up before were on their feet, demanding answers. And when the vote finally came, it wasn't even close. 92% of the community voted against the property acquisition initiative. I'll never forget the look on Mr. Nichols's face as the result was announced, like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. Within a week, the property acquisition initiative was officially canceled. But it didn't stop there. The community demanded a full audit, and what they found was even worse than I expected. Turns out, Mr. Nichols had been embezzling HOA funds for years, padding his pockets while pretending to enforce community standards. By the end of the month, he wasn't just fired, he was under criminal investigation. And the best part? The HOA board voted to disband the Special Enforcement Committee permanently. No more surprise inspections. No more bogus fines. Freedom at last. 1 month later, I stood on my porch, garden gnome still proudly in place, watching a moving van haul away the last of Mr. Nichols's stuff. He had no choice but to sell his house and leave the neighborhood. As his car pulled away, I couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time in years, I finally had peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away again. And the garden gnome? He's still standing there, smiling, as a reminder to anyone who tries to mess with me. You mess with my home, and you'll pay the price.